Okay, they had you.
Put it on them at time.
Okay, check it once.
How is this? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Welcome on this snowy Sunday afternoon to Remembering Cedarburg, the first in a series of fireside chats. As the director of the Cultural Center, I'd like to assure you that this chat won't be the last, especially not with a crowd like this today. Initially, we thought we'd be successful if we had at least 30 people. The idea behind this series came from our Cultural Center board member, Judy Jepson, was promoted by our committee chairman, Mayor Jim Coutts, and was realized by a group of energetic volunteers, Bob Fuller, Jackie Decker, Sue Jarmady, Fred Wessel, and Bob and Marcia Smith. The second fireside chat is already planned for Sunday, March 12th at the Firehouse, and the topic will be the Cedarburg Fire Department through the years. We hope that you will continue these discussions in your own homes, sharing your personal memories with your families, and, most importantly, recording them. Just as we will be recording the stories shared here today, we hope you will do the same. But, as no less an authority than Dear Abby reminded the public in one of her columns last week, remember that it's not enough to capture the past on tape or other electronic media. Tapes begin to flake and fade after 30 years, and so by all means, write your memories down. Old-fashioned pen and paper are still the very best way to preserve your stories. Enough of my Sunday sermon. Now I'm proud to introduce the leader of this effort and our moderator for the afternoon, Mayor Jim Coutts.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd like to welcome you all to this, the first, as Sarah said, of a series of what we hope will be just fun type of afternoons to share some things about Cedarburg and to get some things recorded that are memories of a lot of you people as well. And one of the things that there's a sheet out there to sign up to if there's other topics that you would like to see, and if any of you would like to participate in these discussions, please let us know. The purpose of the fireside chats is set forth in the handout that was on the table. I don't know if everybody got that. Is to be educational. We hope that we can learn some things through these, hopefully to be entertaining. We know it'll be entertaining, and I have the good fortune of every second Wednesday and fourth Wednesday to go to the firehouse and to share time with the senior firefighters. And that's an interesting experience. I sure learn a lot about Cedarburg, and they get into some interesting discussions once in a while there. And I'm sure that'll happen here. Also, as you noticed, we are videotaping because we want to create an archive for future history projects. And we want to record that. And as Sarah said, we also want to get some of this stuff written down on paper and transcribed on paper so we can remember it. I'd like to thank the organizing committee, especially Judy Jepson, for getting this idea going. One day I happened to get a letter at the City Hall, and somebody was doing something like this in Milwaukee, and Judy said, wouldn't this be great if we did it in Cedarburg? And I said, oh, that'd be excellent. So we got our committee together, and away we went, and here we are. And what we're going to do today is we're going to basically kind of have some general questions. I sent a letter out, or the committee sent a letter out asking all the participants to start off by sharing one memory or one idea of Cedarburg that they knew something about, but maybe not too many other people would. And we told them to be a little bit careful maybe in what they say about that as well. And then also, we hope that we will have some time for questions from the audience, and Bob and Marcia Smith are on either side. So as things progress, if you have a question, if you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand, and Bob and Marcia will see that you get a card, and then you can write out the question, and then I will try and then transcribe that to the panel so that they can all respond to that in whatever manner. So if you, hopefully we'll have time for that. And also, hopefully, we'll have time at the end that you can informally kind of discuss things with the members of the panel. What we want to do now is introduce the panelists. I'm sure that many of you know who the panelists are, starting with Palmer Krueger. Palmer has been a lifelong resident of Cedarburg. I think, Palmer, only for the time maybe you spent in service that you weren't in Cedarburg, and a past owner of Bars at the Bridge restaurant, and is very active in the community in the Lions Club, and also was a former member of our Landmarks Commission. Ed Rappold. Ed, nobody, I don't think, has done more than Ed to record things about Cedarburg in terms of the photographs that Ed has. And I think, Ed, you mentioned something to me the other day that when you were growing up, you lived in what was known as the Columbia district of the city, out where Hefner's Custard is now. So maybe during that process, Eddie will explain something about that. And he has some new pictures, I believe, too. And Lucille Becker, Lucille Eulig. Lucille has spent just about all of her life in Cedarburg. Lucille and I have a distinction of having taught together for a number of years in the Mequon-Thiensville School District. And Lucille will share some of her ideas about Cedarburg, and as will everybody else. Tony Fisher. Tony, raise your hand, Tony, so they know that. I'm sure they don't have to do that. Tony is a lifelong resident of Cedarburg, and is one of the people who was very active with his brother, former Mayor Steve Fisher, in terms of preserving so much in Cedarburg. And Tony was a very important part of what Steve did as well. And we appreciate him being here. And Tony is one of those guys who lives right downtown on Washington Avenue. And Gloria Wetzel is also a resident of Washington Avenue. And Gloria did live in Thiensville for a while, I believe, for a year and a half or so, Gloria, before you moved to Cedarburg, and then spent some time in California. And Gloria lives in her house is on I think the National Register of Historic Places. And Gloria was a teacher for a long time and curriculum director in the Cedarburg school system. And Bob Armbruster, Howard Kermsey, who donated the water fountain downtown in front of City Hall, calls Bob Cedarburg's Jimmy Stewart. And I guess because Bob served with Jimmy Stewart in the Second World War in England. And you all know Bob from the jewelry shop. And Bob is one of the guys who's got more information and more artifacts and more maps and pictures and you name it. I think, Eddie, if anybody's, got some pictures maybe you don't have, you ought to look through Bob's second store of his store, and I'm sure you've done that. So this is our panel, and we're so happy that they could be here to get this series off to a good start. So Palmer, let's start with you. We're going to ask you now and we'll just go around the circle, and as I told you before, let's just have a chat. Let's not just be real formal. And if somebody from the audience maybe wants to jump in and ask a question, that's fine. Palmer, what's one thing in Cedarburg that you know something about or would like to share with someone or all of us, a memory that you have of Cedarburg that maybe not too many people know about?
I could start by saying that my interest would be in the Cedarburg Krueger blacksmith shop that was on the corner of Western Avenue and Washington Avenue. And I have a lot of memories of that building and the work that was done in that particular building. I have a photograph here with me that indicates where this building used to be. This building used to be where the Tripar oil station was located on Western and Washington Avenue. And it's too bad this building has been demolished, but it is a historic landmark in Cedarburg for many years, and too bad it was taken down.
Did you help your dad in the blacksmith shop when?
No, I was an antagonizer, I think.
Okay.
No, I did a lot of watching.
I know you have a brother by the name of Harvey who happens to be here today, who I think inherited some of your dad's blacksmithing
right. Yes.
characteristics, right, Harv? He's a handyman. He keeps everything going. Eddie, how about you? Memory of Cedarburg?
Well, I've got a lot of memories. I don't know where to start. Probably the most interesting one would be the time when we had to take Jim in the old Turner Hall. And we had to run from the grade school all the way through the front yard, down this block, into the Turner Hall, regardless of what the weather was. And then we'd have to do our gymnasium, getting all sweated up. And then, of course, in the cold weather, like today, possibly, we'd run all the way back to the school, but we never got pneumonia.
Now, Eddie, just in case somebody here doesn't remember, tell them where the Turner Hall was located.
Turner Hall was on the corner where the First Star Bank is now, on the corner of Turner and Washington Avenue. Where was I? Oh, the thing I remember most, and the days we'd like to go was on Mondays, because on the weekend they always had dances and something else going on, and of course they served a lot of beer there, and it was always a nice smell. We went back to school with a second-hand jag. Down below on the corner, they also had the jail. On the northeast corner of the basement, they had a jail in it. I never was in here, though.
Okay. Lucille?
Well, I'd like to add something to what Palmer was talking about, because I lived on Western Avenue too. And one of the entertainments that we had as children was to go down to the blacksmith shop and stand at the half door there and peer over the top and watch your dad shoe the horses. We thought that was just fine entertainment. It took a while too for that to be accomplished. But I had another story I wanted to tell. I guess the snow reminded me of it today. When I was a child, this was in about 1936, and we had a lot of snow that year. It was endless snow. In fact, my dad took a picture of someone who had put their hat on the top of a telephone pole out on what is now 57, and my grandparents had a little farm there. And the snow piled up so that they could put a hat up on the top of the telephone pole. And one day, my uncle, Herman Schiller, who lived down on Western too, that was a busy street, right? Stopped at the house. He worked for the railroad, and he told my dad that the train was stuck. And he was going around trying to find some men who would go with him to help him shovel out the train. And so my dad and a lot of the other neighbors went down. I'm not exactly sure where it was stuck, but they, by hand, shoveled out the train. So must have been a big snow.
I was kidding you this morning when it snowed. Just to try and prime her for this afternoon, I said, remember that big snow in 1936 or 1929? And she said, no, it was 1936.
Remember 29.
Tony?
Well, I'd just like to say that when Palmer talked about his blacksmith shop, that every Saturday morning when we went up to catechism, we always stopped in there and looked in the front window and watched them, the front door, and watched them shoe the horses, and we spent a lot of time looking in there. And when he talked about the Turner Hall, there's a lot of things that went on in that Turner Hall, and among some of the things was the Turner basketball team, and they really had crowds in that. And one night, I don't know what possessed me, but I had a wad of gum. And I threw that gum, and it stuck up on the wall in the kitchen. And I went up and I tried to get it off, and I couldn't get it off, and it started smearing on, so I didn't want to get balled out, so I left the house and I went up there where they were having a basketball game. I don't know how I got in because I had to pay, but somehow I got into it. And I was up there till about 11 o'clock, and they were all going all over the city looking for me, and they found me. At 11 o'clock, my sister came up on the balcony and got me out. But what I was really going to talk about is the fact of what you remember, that we used to have, you might say, had a farm across the street, because we at one time had pigs. They were slaughtered, and we made sausage back there. We raised chickens. Well, that's right downtown Cedarburg.
That was in the home that you live in right now.
Right. And I know my dad had 4 brothers in Milwaukee would come out the day that they butchered the pigs and make sausage. And among other things, my dad, this was during Prohibition, and they all had a little wine in the basement. They made wine. And he gave them some wine when they came in the house, and his brother sort of says, oh, this is Fußwasser. Now, if you don't know that in German, it's like foot water. But by the time they all came out in the interurban to come out here, and when the day was over, he had enough wine that he forgot to put his shoes on because they had to take their shoes off when they came in the house. My dad made slippers. He was a shoemaker, and he made slippers, and they all had slippers on. When he went back, my brother, his brother that had, let's call it Fußwasser, forgot to change his shoes. He went home with his slippers on. And my dad says, I'll teach him to call my wine Fußwasser.
Gloria?
Well, I'll start out with my parents from the beginning. They moved to Cedarburg in 1920, and I was born a few years later. They built a house, a brand new house. Oh, before I go on to that, I was born in the little house next to Barth's restaurant. And I learned that Miss Kiefoos, Marie Kiefoos, was born in that house also. But anyway, my parents built the house next to what was then the Methodist Church. Now it's the Baptist Church. And I lived there from the time I was, well, shortly after I was born until I was about 8 years old. My grandfather, B.J. Wetzel, lived with us for a period of time. And he was a great big man. Well, my mother sort of thought he looked like Major Hoople in the Green Sheet. Those of you that know the Green Sheet remember that. But he was a very portly man. And every day when the weather was nice, he and I would take a walk. We would walk from my house down to the depot. And as we walked, he would tell me stories. And then he would pause, and I'd say, "And then what, Grandpa?" And then he'd tell me some more. And he told some wonderful stories. It wasn't until years later that my mother told me that when she went to school one time, she saw Miss Kleiner, and Miss Kleiner said, "You know, Mrs. Wetzel, Gloria tells the most wonderful stories." And my mother wondered where I learned those. But anyway, one thing that we noticed when we walked, this is something I think maybe most people don't know. When we walked past the city park, the city was dumping a lot of things there. The city park was really a swamp. And it wasn't useful at all for a park. There were nettles growing there. And one time I got nettles on my legs, and they really stung a lot. But the park was a swamp, and one of the people who helped the park, who contributed trees to it, was Walter Nero. And he had, as a tavern, he had what is today's the Stagecoach Inn. That was his. And he also had a greenhouse back in there it was on the little what do you call it, mill race back there. And he took great pride in donating some nice trees, and they still are growing there today, some of them. And he was such a gentle man, and he really enjoyed Cedarburg, so I think we should mention him.
Thank you, Gloria. Eddie, yeah.
Gloria?
Ed said before, I wonder if Gloria's going to talk about the park, so now he's got the lead in.
When I tell a story about the park and the swamp, I always tell the people there are a lot of bodies buried there. Well, then they come around with a frown. But then when I tell them that their bodies are Model T Fords, well, then they start smiling. But we used to have a lot of fun there. There was a lot of recreation in that area, too. Because we'd go there with our BB guns and shoot rats. And there were a lot of them there.
I never knew about
You
that.
didn't know that.
Bob?
Well, all these stories bring up memories for me too. When you mentioned the snowstorm, I was a member of the Legion Ambulance Squad at that time, and we had this storm that was coming, and we took one patient to Port Washington, barely made it, had to come back. They said there was another patient, so we took it to the hospital over in Port Washington, and between on Highway 141 at that time, near the Schmitz Pavilion, we hit a snowbank and we just couldn't budge anymore, so we managed to squeeze out of the ambulance, and we stayed at Schmitz Pavilion overnight and then walked back to Cedarburg the next morning with the Turner Hall. We lived right across the street from the Turner Hall, and we had the keys for the Turner Hall, so on Sunday afternoons and things, I knew where the keys were, so I'd sneak them out and we'd go over and shoot baskets over there. And another incident with communication, on December 7th, 41, announcing Pearl Harbor, I had a phone call. It was a Milwaukee Journal. They put out extras to reach the people in there, and he asked me to round up some boys to peddle extras. They were going to have a truck out there very shortly, so I had to dig up boys to peddle the wars declared against Germany, and that was quite an incident. They also used to call our store late in the evening after a high school basketball game to see what the score was so they could put it in the paper. Not like these days, have a helicopter flying over the football field to watch the game directly.
Okay, how about artifacts now? One of the other things that we did, and Palmer brought his picture along of the blacksmith shop, and Palmer didn't bring that, and I knew he had that picture, and I said, Palmer, I think it would be a good idea. So he ran home and got that so he would have it. And I know when Eddie had his, for the Ozaki County Historical Society, when Ed made a presentation of some of his pictures, there were a couple of people who had never seen pictures of the blacksmith shop and thought that was one of the neatest buildings, and had the idea that they would really like to recreate something like that building, or a type of building like that in Cedarburg again. So Palmer, unless you have anything else you want to add about the blacksmith shop or anything else?
Well, I have quite a list of things to talk about.
Okay, okay. Palmer told me he had that all set, yeah. Or shall we go around and have the artifacts, and then we'll come back and share some of those? How's that?
Why don't you do that?
Eddie, do you have your book of pictures you want to...
This isn't an artifact. This is just one of 32 bookfuls that I have, totaling 1,654 pictures of old Cedarburg. And as Sarah said, black and whites and paper won't fade. Well, these are going to be good for 100 years, and after that, I don't care. But there's a lot of history.
That's
For
great.
instance, that one.
Ed has 3 of the books here, and later we can have those out, I think, and people can...
I'll lay them down
Sure.
over here, and they can come and look at them.
Okay, real fine.
Ask any questions.
Good, okay.
I'm
Well, you
still-
published, Eddie, you have at least one book that you published with photographs of Cedarburg, right? Or a couple?
That book has been printed 3 different times, and we're thinking possibly of doing another one if we can. And if nothing else, another edition or another volume, because that book had 300 pictures in it, and I think I can scrape another 300 good ones that'll go into another book.
Yeah, okay, great. Lucille?
Well, I was looking through our old papers and I came across, I suppose, the fact that my husband was involved with insurance is something that just caused me to be interested in this. I found this old Cedarburg Mutual fire insurance policy, and it's dated 1906. And it says that the insurance is good for 5 years, and the price is $7.08, plus $1 for surveying the property. Then I opened it up, and it has the coverages. So I don't know if you'd like these coverages, because the house, which was a 2-story, you know, the old stone farmhouses that they had back then, and the value on it was $500. Then they had household furniture, beds and clothing, value $200. Wearing apparel, $75. They didn't have any musical instruments, I guess. The barn was $130. The granary was $75, the horses $80, the cattle $60. The farming implements $50. The buggy, cutter, and carriage $100. How would you like to buy one for that price? And so on. So I just thought to myself, and altogether the value was $1,415. So just think of the difference in the value of things nowadays. It's really phenomenal.
Now the wearing apparel is worth more than that.
Yeah, right. The wearing apparel would probably be more. I have another picture, but I'll let that
Oh,
go
go ahead with your picture. That's okay.
Well, I have a picture, and the reason I brought it was because I noticed it was taken by the Edward Rappel Studios, and it was a picture of my 8th grade class when we were 8th graders. And I thought, it got me to thinking how connected we all were in those days, because like I said before, we watched your dad, do his job, and then later my sister married your brother. And Edward and I belonged to the same church, and we put out one of the books one year, remember, with the pictures and all. And I walked past Tony's house every single day, and we'd pick up his sister because she was great friends with my sister. And Gloria, my grandma, when my grandma came over from Germany with her folks, the first couple of weeks she lived in Gloria's house, in the house that Gloria lives in right now, because that's where her uncle lived then. And of course, Gloria and I have been friends for years and years because her best friend lived next door to me, so she'd come over and play with us. And as far as armbrusters was concerned, well, you got your class ring there, and you got your confirmation watch there, and
Your engagement ring?
yeah, and Gracie played the piano for all the events in high school, and when I was in 8th grade, Miss DeLuca, some of you remember her, she was our music teacher, said to me, now if you practice real hard, you can take Gracie's place next year because she's graduating. And so then later, my sister babysat for Gracie's kids. So, in those days, the city was so small. And you knew just about everybody, or if you didn't know them personally, you knew a brother or a sister, so we were really connected in those days, I think. So much more than is true today. That's it.
Lucille, I don't want to interrupt now, but while we talk about that, we do have a question from the audience. And Eddie, I know you have responded to me about this. When you were children, did you hear much German spoken in Cedarburg? You told me about the situation with the police chief with your car in the window. But
Well, personally, I had to go to kindergarten 2 years before I could go to first grade because I didn't know enough English.
Well, I went to school too without knowing a word of English.
Well, I came out of high school and I didn't know much.
things haven't changed, Eddie, have they, today? From what we hear about some of the things. Okay. Tony, you have something you brought along?
Yeah, I have here an iron that my mother used to iron the clothes. And there was 11 of us in the house, and I'll never understand how she did it all, because my dad, when he came over from Europe, he was a shoemaker, but over there that was considered, it wasn't just a shoe repair, you made shoes, and they had to go to work every day in a white shirt. Every day a clean white shirt. And between white shirts and I remember when all the baby pictures, all the kids all had white clothes on all the time. I'll never know how she kept up with all the ironing. And this is what she ironed with. And if you could take that off, you put it on the stove and you get another one that was hot. And it had another use. In winter, since there was no central heating, or any heating except there was a kitchen range and a stove in the dining room, they would heat these up, wrap them in paper and then in cloth and take them up to the bed and put them in the bed, because when we went to bed, you could see your breath. It was just like being outside. And so they served a good purpose. And I have the coffee grinder here. And I have sentimental reason for that because my grandfolks lived with us. And my grandmother would always get this, and they all had long skirts on down to the floor, you know, and she would open her knees and put that in between her knees, and she'd have me come over when I was just a little kid, and I would grind it up for her, so I have very good memories of this coffee grinder.
That's neat. That's neat.
So that's all I have here.
Thanks,
Oh, and
Tony.
I do have a picture. In that Turner Hall, among other things they used to have dances where they would all get dressed up. And masquerade balls. And one year, John Olson, who not lived in this building, but this was his store at one time, and he lived right next door where the tavern is, he and I went as Maggie and Jiggs.
Oh, and you got the picture. Hey, that's
Yeah.
neat. That's neat. Gloria, you have that that vase, or whatever we want to call it. You want to explain?
Right, it's a gray stoneware jar, and it was made by the Herman Company in Milwaukee about 1880. The way we got it was during the Second World War, my mother was working at Kiekefer's. Quite a few people in town worked at Kiekefer's during the war. And one morning when she was walking to work, she saw Mrs. Bundy, who in her front yard had two of these jars like this. And my mother admired it. We'd always liked these gray stoneware jars. So my mother asked if she could buy it from Mrs. Bundy. And Mrs. Bundy said, yes, but wait till tomorrow, because my son wanted to keep one of them. And she said, I don't know which one it was. They were a little bit different in design. So she said, okay. The next morning when she walked past, there was the second jar laying in little pieces on the grass. They had water in it, and that night it froze, and the jar was cracked. And Mrs. Bundy said to my mother, you can have this one. I'll sell it to you. Something might happen to this. I'd rather see you get it than have it wrecked again. And this is the jar. And
When was that, Gloria? What time was that, probably?
Well, that was during the Second World War. That would have been about 1950, no, 45. 1945.
45?
Right.
Okay. And you still have it?
Yes. The newer people to Cedarburg don't realize what it was like during the Second World War, having the Kiekefer plant here in Cedarburg. A lot of people worked there. There were assembly lines, and the women were working away on, and it was quite a big operation. I have one other thing here. About 3 years ago, I was walking down Bridge Street, and two little girls came up. Well, they weren't little, but two girls came up to me, and they said, are you the lady who collects antiques? And I said, yes. And they said, well, we have our grandmother's iron, and we don't want it anymore, so you can have it. So they went into the house, and they brought out this iron and gave it to me, and I've had it ever since. And it's brass with a wooden handle, and the end comes out, let's see, I guess I can't, no, here. And they would heat the iron part in the fire or on a stove or whatever, and then they would slide that in and put the little part like that, put it back together again. And about a month ago, the Milwaukee Journal, in their antiques section, they had early irons carry weight as collector's items. And it said, it tells about how the Germans liked irons and how they used them. And actually, this was a rare one, and it brought $2,000 in an auction. And another rare one brought $11,000, but that one had the people's faces on each of those little lumps up here. that the iron was used for. But it's such a pretty little item. So,
Thanks, Gloria. Bob, how about you? I would imagine you have half a Cedarburg here with you that you brought. Huh? You can't believe the collection that Bob has. It's just unbelievable how dedicated he is to maintaining things from Cedarburg and what he's acquired over the years from his grandfather and other people who were involved in different positions in the city of Cedarburg.
Well, I was going to talk about the German influence that you mentioned in Cedarburg, but this morning when I was reading the Journal Sentinel, I saw that in the Ozaki section, Cedarburg was being touted as Sweet Street or Candyland Lane because we have 3 candy stores in town. And then it made me think that at one time we had 3 cigar manufacturers. This one was the Cedarburg Homesteader. That was run by Fred Schutte. His name is on the inside here. The cigars must have been a big thing. Cedarburg Homesteader, Fred G. Schutte maker. And the other one was Mr. Lutz on Washington Avenue, a few doors south of us. He made the Lutz frogs, with pictures of frogs. And the other one was Our Comrade made by the Groth and Tiemann, Cedarburg, Wisconsin. So we had cigar makers. We also had 4 soda water manufacturers. These were the bottles. This is H. Rissmeyer, Cedarburg, Wisconsin. Heavy bottles made in 2 pieces that were sealed together, and they were stored in the wooden cartons upside down to keep they had a cap here that had to be kept moist, and so they were stored upside down. This was the George Ritter, Cedarburg, Wisconsin. I have a whole case of those thanks to Howard Van Lyck. I bought those from him. And the other one was Becker and Whirl, Cedarburg, Wisconsin. And the other one was Nick Becker. But they all had their names and they all had soda water factories.
Were they all operating about the same time, Bob? Do you know?
Pretty close. The cigar makers were very close, and the other ones were in steps.
There was also a Schutte and Son up on Cleveland in Washington.
Is that right, too? Yeah.
You know, just north of the McKay building.
That's right.
Schutte and Son.
Yeah. With the German influence, without radio and television that we have these days, we had a lot of plays, German plays, and these billboards were distributed around the stores to let it know about theater, Cedarburg Turn Hall, all in German. Sonntag, January 23rd, 1898. And but everything is listed in here. Tickets for 25 cents, Kinder 15 cents. My grandfather, there was a German paper that was read quite widely. They were doing a story on Cedarburg, and this is a flyer that they had out, Die Geschichte, eine kleine Stadt, the activities of a small city. And at that time, Cedarburg was called the Pearl of the Milwaukee area. And they had a picture of my grandfather, and it told about the story of his term as mayor of Cedarburg. As an incidental one, I brought a flyer out, a lawn party tonight on Fred Wittenberg's lawn by electric light. August 11th, 1898. So,
you know where they got the electricity from? They had a generator in the mill, the woolen mill.
right.
And I think today, if you look on that first little corner building, there's still a little tripod where the wire went from the mill across the street into the Wittenberg yard. And that's where they got their generation from.
Ed, following up on that, one of the questions from the audience, and these are great, and we'll try and incorporate these if it's appropriate. Would any of you be able to tell us a little bit more about the Wittenberg Mill? How long it took to build it, what parts were original or added? Bob, you weren't there when it was built, were you? Huh? We kid Bob a lot about this. I'm in Lions with Bob, and he's the luckiest guy in the world in our raffles, so we kind of get back at him by kidding him a little bit. But how about the Wittenberg Mill? You go on?
My grandfather had some of the original stock in the mill, and we were before it was sold now to Jim Pape, or to this developer before Jim Pape. We had to turn in our stocks, but we held those stocks all those years. About once in 10 years, I'd go to a stockholders meeting. I wish I had a picture of that. It was in the corner building. They had a pot-bellied stove, a cord with a light bulb, and all the older families that had original stocks. It didn't pay much in the later years, but we always used to get some free blankets from the Wittenberg family. But I was there when they decided not to sell it to the developer and tear it down.
How long did the mill operate? Do you remember the mill operating? Palmer, go ahead. Fill in, whatever. Yeah.
I remember that when there'd be a wedding or something, people would go down there to purchase blankets, you know, as gifts. I do remember that. And I remember there was talk that they supplied blankets, but I really don't know too much about it. So it was there for a long time, and because my parents spoke about it, so I knew it had to be there for a while, but I really...
Yeah, Eddie or Tony, go ahead.
Well, there was something around 1960 that they finally closed up. And that was about the time that the thing was standing vacant in that. But the only thing I can remember about it, well, there are a couple of things. That little dye house that they had across the street where these little antique shops are right alongside the bridge, there was a great big rope that went across, and that took the power from the power in the big building and transmitted it to the dye house. And then another thing about the dye house is that when they weren't using the particular colored dye, they just dump it in the river. Well, we were swimming down in Columbia. Well, we didn't know when we were going to go swimming whether it was going to be yellow or green or blue.
Did you get that too?
No.
I worked at the Wool Mill when I started in the Wool Mill when I was 16 years old. When I was 16 years old, and I earned 14 cents an hour. And I still have the little stubs from my check that I got, you know, at that time. And we thought wonders what we were getting. And a couple of years later, the NRA came in, and then we got 35 cents an hour. And I remember real well when they dished out the first check, everybody in the wool mill ran down Main Street as fast as they could go to Garrett's drugstore to cash their check because they were afraid they're going to run out of money.
That's great.
I worked there for 8 years, and it was hard work, but it was all you could get, and you were darn glad to earn that.
Yeah, now the NRA, that's where we got the idea for the Fireside Chats, you know, was back in President Roosevelt's time when he had the Fireside Chats, and that's how we decided to use that title, and the NRA was right part of that. I guess as an old history teacher, I remember some of that stuff. I do remember some of it. Palmer, anything?
I can remember hearing this, that the woolen mills made woolen blankets for the World War I veterans, Army and military. Had big contracts with the Cedarburg or Wittenberg Woolen Mills. And that was quite a big...
He even made them for the Spanish-American War, the Dewey Guards. Because I got a picture of them where they're marching up and down the street practicing, and then they got these blankets thrown across the shoulder.
Tony?
Well, two of my sisters worked in the office at the woolen mill, and I worked there between my junior and senior year in high school. I worked in the basement where they washed the wool, and they had this long washing machine where it just picked up the wool and would there's something from the ceiling would come up and down and would go the full length of the basement and pick up the wool in the water and back in the water, and then finally it turned around and went into an oven, a huge oven, and my job was to get it, and they would put it in what they call a duster. After it was dried, whatever left was there, this was supposed to shake it out. Well, it was so hot down there that didn't have anything to wipe my eyes with the sweat when I was sweating, because I had to tie it from the ceiling. And I put a thermometer in the wool once when it was coming out, where it came out of the machine. It was 120 degrees. And I lost 25 pounds that summer. And I ate everything I could lay my hands on. It wasn't, of course, when I got through with that job, I'd run home, take a bath, and I'd go down to Rivoli Theater and usher till 12, 11, 10:30, 12. Not 12, but about 11 would be the latest. Then I'd go back and I'd go, next morning go back to work. But it was hot down there, and I made 25 cents an hour. And I did work in there once after that. I worked in the shipping department, and the women worked upstairs, and they pulled these blankets, and they would take any flaws. If there was something in there, they'd pick it out. And one time when I was working, I bent over and I tore my pants. And I went up there and I asked one of them to sew my pants shut for me, because they had needles up there, and she sewed it. I don't know if she did this deliberately or not, but she sewed it to my underwear. That's it.
That's something you remember. Eddie, you brought up about the fact of dumping the dye in the creek. One of the questions that somebody asked about where you went swimming, where there were the favorite swimming holes in Cedarburg when you were younger.
In the water by Highland.
Highland
Bridge.
Right by the old where Weber's where
the old mill was, yeah.
There also was a little, they dumped some sand right where the Boy Scout house was, remember? And they had a little beach there. But when my dad found out that we went swimming there, he said, no.
Well, the big problem with swimming in the river was the bloodsuckers. I was in charge of the recreation program during the summertime. One little boy came half an hour early, at 8:30, and all of a sudden I heard this screaming and yelling. I lived right across from the city park later on, and I went out there and his legs were black with bloodsuckers. So I carried him home and got out the salt shaker.
We used to swim right behind our store. We had a pier and lights there. We'd swim day and night. There were several places that had piers, and we'd swim there.
Tony?
I had another story about the woolen mills. I also worked in a dye house, and that was across the street, that little building. And they had a big vat, which probably 6 feet tall, and they would pour bags of wool in there just till you couldn't absolutely move it. And it was my job to mix that wool so it all got dyed evenly. And when you put this big stick in there, and I would stand on the edge of that, and I would jump. And when I started out, I would just hang there. It took hours before I could actually move that. And that's another time I lost a lot of weight. There's another summer.
Well, you know, what was amazing to me, that in the winter time they used to cut ice down halfway between the city park and Highland Bridge. Why that ice wasn't colored when they cut it? Because you could have had pink martinis or...
Another question that came from the audience is that there's a lot of buildings in Cedarburg that have been built with the stone from the Anschutz quarry. And maybe you can tell us where that was, and tell us a little bit about the quarry. and how that stone was used.
Yeah. On my mother's side, her dad and her grandfather operated what they call the Anschutz Limestone Quarry Company, and that was originated in about 1882, 83, I think, or somewhere in there, and it was located on Highway 57, which is now Columbia Avenue, between Cedarburg and Grafton. And as you approach the curve before you get into Grafton, where the tavern is on the corner there, just before you get to that tavern, as you look to the right, you can see all this limestone protruding and with trees growing on the edges, and this was called the limestone of the Anschutz family, and this particular limestone was very solid type of limestone. I guess there were softer limestones and there were hard limestones. And I just made a note of the Ozaukee County Courthouse in Port Washington. The original courthouse is made from the Anschutz limestone. And the Cedarburg State Bank right down the street here, right next to the barber shop and between the woolen mills, that building stood there alone, and that was made with the Anschutz limestone. And Cedarburg churches, and the Cedarburg High School and grade school buildings, which now is City Hall and the Lincoln Building. The Pfister Hotel in downtown Milwaukee is made with and the St. Mary's Water Tower is made with the Anschutz limestone. And I got that from my family genealogy history, that we have these facts.
What was the date on that?
1885.
Oh, it's got to be before that. It's got to be before that because our home was built in 1865 and these churches were built before that.
Yeah, I think the Anschutz farm was purchased in 1838.
Yeah.
And they already started manufacturing limestone bricks and stones. So it probably was very true that it became an official type of a business in 1885.
Because as we were kids, we'd be playing around in there. That was our second home, and there were some great big stones there that matched the stones that were on the front door of our home. These big blocks. Now the limestone that they had up here at the growth lime kilns, that was lime too, but it was a different kind of lime.
That's right.
See, that's why they could crush it and burn it and make limestone out of it. Or lime.
Yeah, barn lime.
Barn lime or barn lime.
Bob? You know anything about the Anschutz quarry?
Oh, quite a bit. In fact, somebody
Nothing, Bob doesn't.
somebody just purchased that property, and I helped them out with a lot of pictures when the quarry was active. When it was discontinued, it was called the Hobos Camp, and people during the Depression years, hobos or tramps walking along the railroad track would stay over there overnight, and there are a lot of fireplaces and things that they had down there.
Eddie's looking for pictures. I would imagine you have some, Ed. Well, that's kind of a landmark as far as Cedarburg is concerned, those buildings that are built with, and that's a very integral part of the Cedarburg community. And another thing that was here that we've got a couple questions about, and some of us, when I was very young, I remember this because I used to come to Cedarburg to visit relatives that were here when I was very young. But what about Hilgen Spring Park? I would imagine there's some fond memories that a lot of people in the audience may have about that, and also some of you. Tony.
Well, I have a very fond memory of that. among other things they did down there, they would have a raffling of poultry around Thanksgiving time. And I was probably only about 7 years old or something when my dad says, let's go down to Hilgen Spring Park and see if we can win something for Mother. So we walked down there, and he was buying chance. We finally won a little duck, but he wanted to get something bigger. He wanted a goose, and he kept on taking chances. He never won, so finally he decided if he was going to get a goose, he'd have to go and buy it from. So he went up to the bar where Mr. Barth was, and he leaned over. I could still see him leaning over the bar, and he's whispering, and Mr. Barth shakes his head, and then he gave him some money. And in those days, you didn't get a goose or a duck like you do now that comes from the butcher. You got a live one. So he had the big goose, and I had the little duck, and he says, now don't tell Mother I didn't win this. So we walked all the way from Hilgen Spring Park, me holding this little duck, and he this big goose, walking all the way back downtown, and I never did tell my mother till many years later after he was dead.
Palmer, I know you have some family history there.
Yes, maybe a lot of people wouldn't know where it's located, where it was located. Where now the Cedars are, everybody know where the Cedars bowling alleys are located? Well, that used to be Hilgen Spring Park in that area. There was 68 acres that Mr. Hilgen, which is my wife's great-grandfather, purchased that land, and he made a resort out of that. He had hotels there, and then he had carnival things there. They had Ferris wheels and various kinds of amusements, and that was in operation until the Depression and the Prohibition days came through, and then my father-in-law lost the business there, and then it became the Cedars. It became the Cedars then, and then there's a big subdivisions in there now. But that was all Hilgen Spring Park, and in that area. That was 68 acres that was used for the resort business. And they had people coming from Milwaukee, Chicago, St. Louis. The only transportation that was really available was a train, and these people would gamble at the resort. And they'd live in the hotels for several days and then go back home again, I suppose. But that was big business. Very big business. And,
Did it go from the railroad tracks, Palmer? Is that about where it started and then went east?
Yeah, it went east of the railroad tracks down to where the Cedars now is located. Used to be a swimming pool that they made, dug out of Cedar Creek, and it was a bandstand, which is there's a replica here in Cedarburg at the park here in Cedarburg. And that same type of stand was down at the Cedars, or at the Hilgen Spring Park at that time. And
we celebrated the centennial in 1985. Then that was specifically built to as close as it could be to the gazebo or to the bandstand.
That's
that was
right.
At Hilgen
Yeah.
Spring Park. It's in Centennial Park, right by the swimming pool.
Yeah.
The reason that they built the big depot, which is now up at Pioneer Village, was quite a bit bigger than any other depot up and down the line of the Chicago-Milwaukee-St. Paul Railroad. And the only reason it was that big, and they had a double track, because they hauled people by the train load to go to Hilgen Spring Park. And they had to have this cover for them, and facilities for them.
Did some people come out from Milwaukee on say the interurban rather than on the railroad, and then did they have transportation to the park or something? Yeah, go ahead, Lucy.
I can remember that because we lived on Western Avenue and there was a stop. The interurban made a stop there. And sometimes on Saturdays in summer, there would be company picnics at Hilgen Spring Park because my mother loved watching the crowds go by the house, and she said, Oh, they all look so happy right now, you know. And then like about 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon, you could hear the picnic all the way from Hilgen Spring Park over to our house. And then came the trek back. Yeah, they'd be very happy on the way home.
A lot of the business places in Milwaukee, they would hand out tickets to their customers throughout the year. That would be good when they had picnics down at the park, like the Third Avenue Business Association or whatever they had. They would come out there and it'd be literally thousands. I don't know, I don't want to make a figure, but I think 10, 15,000 would be, at one time would be nothing that they had. And they did have gambling there, and I had another experience once when I was walking through I was down there when one of those picnics was going on, and Whitey Wallers, who was our local gambler, who ran the gambling down there, called me over and he says, "Tony, get some beer for the fellas that were working on behind this big 6-wheel." So I got the beer for him, and he gave me a quarter. Now this is during the Depression. If I ever had a dime, I wouldn't buy ice cream soda because I would save a nickel so I could get ice cream some other time. Well, this is the first time I can remember I got a whole quarter, and by gods, I'm going to get an ice cream soda that I've been watching these people eat at Garrett's drugstore all them years. I know the booth I sat in, and I still remember that ice cream soda. That was the best one I ever had.
Bob, do you have any remembrances of Hilgen?
Well, I remember it quite well. My grandfather was mayor years back, and he'd greet all these, like the 3rd Street Business Association in Milwaukee that came out for these picnics, and we have a lot of pictures of him. They'd always take a group picture, and I remember pictures of him there.
There were also large picnics there done by the Miller High Life brewery people. And the Butchers Association of Milwaukee, many butchers in the Milwaukee area or throughout the area, and they had their annual picnics at the park, and there'd be 8, 9, 10,000 people at a time. And
Heine and the Grenadiers.
Heine and the Grenadiers.
I remember Heine
yeah.
and the Grenadiers. I remember them.
Yeah.
I remember walking home from school, and every, you know, if it was warm weather and people had their windows open, you heard Heine all the way home from school.
Another question from the audience, and Ed, I don't know, I think you live closest to this because I think your home was right across the street from Weber's Mill. Can you tell us a little bit about Weber's Mill?
Yeah, the mill stood just about where a little bit behind just about where the Rosaki Bank is now.
Yeah.
On the corner was a big tavern, a saloon, as they called it in those days, dance hall on top. And it was quite a lively place. Since we lived across the street of that, they had dances on Saturday nights, and many a night in the summertime when the window was open, I'd fall asleep with the music of the Kantumi Gofumi, you know, and all the loud talk that went on. But anyways, the mill was run by Schaefer for many years. And then during the Depression time, when the nail business wasn't quite that good, then my uncle and his brother bought the mill and started grinding feed. And of course, I worked in there for quite a few years I drove truck for him when I was about 15. But anyways, that was a nice area down there. In connection with the mill, they had a mill race for the water wheel. Well, the mill race was blasted out of solid rock, so it was nice and clean. It wasn't muddy and all that. Well, during the Depression, Mother would say, when you come home tonight, bring a couple fish along. So, well, there's no problem, you know, I didn't have to go fishing. Because below in the basement, we had a big platform about the size of this partition here. And that was below an elevator, a 12-inch leather belt that had a bunch of cups that transferred the grain to the top floor where it could be spouted into different bins. Well, we'd have to go down there and maintain it and grease it and all that, but they were always dropping, so it was always kicked into the water, and you hear the carp fed on that, big ones. Well, how many do you want? Oh, 3 or 4, that's fine. So anyways, it just so happened I had a spear up in the rafters, and I'd stand there, and when one would come around, I'd get him, see? Well, those were Depression days, so she had these carp, and if they weren't mud-fed, they were all grain-fed. And if you clean them right and took that muddy strip off the back of the fish, they were good. They were just like Cedar Creek catfish. And then she'd can them. She'd not freeze them because we didn't have freezers, but she'd smoke them. And the bigger pieces we'd smoke, and the other ones we'd fry and eat. And so we had fish meat all winter long.
You mentioned a couple times, some of you, about the Depression. What was it like in Cedarburg during the Depression? What are some of your memories? One of the things that I used to do when I was a teacher was I used to have my students always interview either their grandparents or neighbors or somebody who lived during the Depression so that they could get a feeling of what it was like and to see, the different situations that different people had during that time. And that's one of the things that the committee talked about, is that we would like to, one of the questions that we'd like to pose is at different times with various groups of how did the Depression affect you or different people in Cedarburg? So, Gloria?
Well, my parents lost everything. They lost the new house they had built. My father had built a factory. He lost the factory. And we moved to Thiensville for 1.5 years. We lived in a farmhouse. And I went from my nice home in Cedarburg to a home where we had outdoor plumbing. And the house was heated, well, it was heated with coal, but the second story just had registers here and there so the air could come from the first story up into the second story. And we had a big garden. And my father gave me a glass and a stick, and he said, Gloria, if you can fill this glass with potato bugs, I'll give you 10 cents. And I thought that was great. I went around knocking all the potato bugs off, potato plants. But I liked it. I enjoyed this. Somehow there was something about this. We had some chickens, and it was different. I didn't realize really what had happened to my parents. And I admire them so much now that I know they never let me know what was going on. And they always tried to give me whatever I needed. And eventually we moved back to Cedarburg, and my father again had a factory and things picked up. But I'll never forget, and I remember a lot of empty stores with NRA printed on in big letters. I think it was the National Recovery Act.
Excuse me.
Eddie.
The thing I remember most, and every time I eat a soda cracker, is that I smear it on the part that has the bubbles in it now, not the back part, because every time I smeared it at home on the smooth part of or on the bubble part of the cracker, I got a dirty look. I had to smear it on the smooth side so it wouldn't take so much butter.
I guess what I remember is that if it cost money, you didn't do it, It just wasn't done. And but I must say that we never felt like we were poor or anything like that. You just accepted it because I guess you were young enough not to realize that things were ever any different. So we had a great time. It's just that was the rule. If it cost money, we don't do that because you needed every penny. And I remember my dad trying to teach us to have some knowledge of money, and he gave us each a little purse, and in it there was a place for pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters. And then he would give us each 2 cents a day. He said, if you're good, you get 2 cents a day. I don't remember that he ever said we were not good. And then we could spend 2 cents on Saturday. Now 2 cents, what could you get? Well, you could go over to Worth's store and you could get some little clay marbles and you could get penny candy. And then my dad would say, but if you save your 2 cents for a couple weeks, then you'll have a nickel or a dime. Well, my sister was good at that, but I wasn't. So, you know, I know things got so bad that finally my dad said to me, to all three of us one day, that he would write a check for the money we had in our little wallet. And I had about $5, and so he gave me a check for $5, and I'm sure it was because he needed the cash. And of course, I never asked for the money for years and years and years. I think I was probably in high school or college when he finally said to me, "You still got that check?" And of course I did, and he gave me the money. But I think that's the way it was. You just didn't have any money.
Well, everybody was in the same boat.
That's right. Your friends were all in the same boat.
Well, we had that garden back there, and she talks about picking those, but I just hated those potato bugs. And we had a lot of plants. One year I dug out 60-some bushels of potatoes, and that was just on 1/4 of our garden, so we really had a little farm back there. And of course, we lived off of it. And like she said, there really wasn't any money, and you just had to make go. But I always said that my mother's mother, her folks lived with us. And originally when she was in Europe, my mother's mother was a governess in Budapest. And she had learned to cook from the chefs that lived in that cooked for these people. And I said that even though we were poorest church mice, we ate better than the millionaires. The food that my mother cooked day after day is just, I would give anything to have that rather than all the steaks in the world.
Canning was done at that time.
Yeah, we got jars at home, and the sauerkraut, the big crocks this big and that high, and we ate well, and we ate all year, but we didn't have any money. It was just almost from minute to minute as far as having enough money to live.
I know my mother did a lot of canning, pears and peaches and meats and gravies. They were all put in jars and cooked and sanitized as best as they knew how, and kept them in the basement, in the cellar, as they called them then, and we ate that food repeatedly, the week after week for many, many months, and that was the way to stretch the dollar.
Bob, any recollection?
We lived with my grandparents, so my mother and grandmother did their cooking together, but we always, everybody in the family was busy. My brother John and I, he had a summer job. I worked in the cannery for a couple of years. All the fellows going to college or would work at the cannery. It was 35 cents an hour and no limit on time. Some weeks we had 110 hours. So I went from 7 in the morning till sometimes 1 o'clock the next morning. I got a hernia from it. But everybody, my Uncle George was postmaster of Cedarburg at the time, and I'd have to go down to the post, either my brother or myself go down to the post office every morning at 7:30, and we'd deliver the special deliveries to the Mercury, Kike for Mercury or plants. Sometimes there'd be a funeral. There was no flowers would be shipped, and we'd have our bicycles with boxes of flowers being delivered to a funeral home or a family. But everybody pitched in, and we got along.
Well, you bring up the name Keycaver. One of the questions that we have from the audience also, another question is, what did the Keycaver company make during the war, and what other products did they make during their pre- and post-war days? I know I don't remember which was Plant 1 and Plant 2, or where Keycaver Act. Did they start on Western, or did they start on Madison?
They started on Western Avenue, and during the war they made chainsaws in connection with the Distant Chainsaw Company, or Distant Saw Company. And they made the chainsaws for the government, and they were big. I mean, they were two-man chainsaws, two handles here, and the other man had a one handle.
They were cutting the underbrush when they landed in the Pacific. A lot of them were used.
Yeah.
Didn't they make targets too? Some kind of little
Yeah,
motor.
they made something for these towing planes that towed targets for artillery. And then, of course,
When did the Key Caver Company start? Do you remember, anybody remember when it started? And, you know, did Mr. Key Caver start with the outboard motors? Was that,
Outdoors.
he started on a little farm that's now the college, Concordia College, on a farm there, and they had a machine shed. And across the road from them, my uncle lived, and I had to go out there when I was a young boy, from the time school let out until it started again, because it was cheaper to send me out than to feed me at home. And then Elmer was always playing around in that machine shed, and we had to do the work out in the field. Oh, I got so mad at him once in a while. But anyways, no, he started. He bought the old Hanson Company.
Oh, yes.
There used to be the old Hanson Engineering or something. Yeah, but he bought that, and then of course he built that up, and then he took over plant number 2, and then he claimed that outboard motors, and then he claimed that there was a labor shortage, but he wasn't always in favor of what we were doing at City Hall, and so he moved up to Fond du Lac.
but the Mercury outboards really had their start in Cedarburg, right?
Originally it was called Thor. H-O-R.
There is a book called The Iron Fist about, but I can't remember who the author of it is.
Fist.
Yes.
Tony?
When they had the plant up there after they moved away, I remember that my brother, when they were planning to move away, he asked, before they actually moved, he offered them, not offered them, but asked if there's a lot of land down in the south end there to develop how much around the plant they had here. He says, how many acres do you want? And he just didn't take it. He wanted to move. And then later in later years, when he had the plant here and up there, he invited my brother to a picnic for the local plant. And he says, well, why didn't you get both plants together? He says, do you think I want them to compare wages?
So the labor shortage, Eddie, type of thing, huh? Bob, anything else on Key Caver? How about this one? What are your memories of old-time Cedarburg doctors in medical care?
I remember one story about that. I remember if you got a communicable disease like measles or mumps or chickenpox, then Dr. Blanchard came over to your house and put a sign on your door to warn the public that don't go in here or you'll get the measles. And I remember, since we had 4 girls in our family, I came home with the measles, but it took quite a few weeks before it went through the whole family. And my dad was getting pretty impatient about getting that sign down because he was involved with business, you know, and kept his customers away. Well, the day the sign was supposed to come down, my mother called. He came to do it, and my mother said, would you just take a look at, you know, my little sister? And he did, and so he took down the measles and put up the mumps.
Well, the first doctor in Cedarburg was Dr. Hartwig, and he was in here for a couple of years, then he moved to West Bend, and then the Cedarburg people needed a doctor so much, so they sent a whole convoy of wagons over to West Bend, and they enticed him to come back to Cedarburg. He was in connection with a fellow by the name of Bachlo, who was the first pharmacist in town. Well, the doctor I remember is Dr. Coutts, because he took out my tonsils at the age of 3 on the kitchen table. And, well, other than that...
Now that would have been Dr. Coutts' father?
Dr. Coutts' father.
Yeah, and then he succeeded his dad in...
Yeah, and then the other doctors, of course, were O.J. and O.W. Hertz.
Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Hirth had his office next to our store building, one building south, and there was he and a specialist would remove tonsils on a certain day in his office there, and then my mother always tell about all the people laying on the lawn recuperating, but they removed the tonsils. They'd be laying on the lawn, but they when they cleaned up Cedar Creek, they found a lot of medicine bottles. One of the members of the firm that did the removal recovered a lot of medicine bottles in there.
Signs on the door, I think if you go down to our old house now, you find all kind of pinholes in it because, like Lucille said, my mother never got out of the house from the time, from Easter time or from Christmas to Easter, because there were 4 of us in the family at the time, and like it went from one to another, and then we changed and got another one, see? So we had all kind of different pinholes on our book, on our door.
Okay, this is, Tony, go ahead.
I have something. Dr. Blanchard, at one time, his office was in our house, and our grandfather was in his 90s when one day when I was at work, I got a call from my mother that he should come home right away, that grandfather's halfway up the steps, he can't go up and he can't go down. So I ran home. I didn't have a car at the time. I ran home, and by the time I got home, she had gone over to the veterinarians that were next door, and some young veterinarian went there and just picked him up and took him up to his room in bed, and Dr. Blanchard came out of his office and went up there, and he told my mother, well, he'll be dead by morning. Well, the next morning, my grandfather had a habit of sitting in the front there by the window in that little sledge, and he tipped his hat to Dr. Blanchard.
It's getting to be that time, but there's one little story that Eddie and I have talked about that Judy Jepson, who was the person who kind of got this thing started, Judy happened to come across a kind of interesting artifact from one of our former police chiefs, and that we want to do one of those series down the line. We want to have the former police chiefs and police department, and Judy came across this artifact of a police chief by the name of Mr. Beckman, and I happened to mention that to Eddie, and Eddie has a little story about Mr. Beckman. Mr. Beckman was a police chief without a car. He didn't drive, but somebody asked the question. He even helped me take my driver's test to get my license. So Eddie, you want to tell them the story about how you picked up Mr. Beckman, and then we'll close on that and bring in the terminology that he used too.
Did they bring this fireplace up here because they thought this one was going to be so hot? Well, anyways, yeah. Oh, this goes back quite a few years. My 2 brothers and I and my dad washed and polished our 25 Dodge on a Saturday morning, and Mother wanted to have something from the store, so we all piled into the car, and we went up to uptown, which is Cedarburg, and bought what she needed. Well, as you said, he didn't have a car, but at each end of town, like on the corner of Highland and Bridge and Columbia Avenue, and north on Sheboygan Street, south, I don't think there was any further south than the Zeinert property, or which is now the Dairy Queen, was a time clock. He always had to punch in, see? So as we were driving down Columbia again, he was on the bridge, and he always thumbed his way down and got out and punched the clock and went across the street, and he thumbed his way back again. But while he was sitting in our car on the front seat with my dad, he was chewing the fat with my dad, but he was also chewing a chew. And all of a sudden his head turned and went, and he said, "Oh, ich dachte, der Fenster war offen." He thought the window was open.
I really think that we've gotten off to just a great start today with this series, and one of our former mayors is in the audience, Merlin Rostad, and Merlin wrote out on the card, I'd like to tell you about the 1950s. And Merlin, we're going to take you up on that later on. One of the programs we'll maybe, what we want to do down the line is maybe look at some time periods of the 50s or the 60s or, you know, the 40s and the 30s. We just wanted to kind of get it off to a general start today. And I, again, thank all of you for being here, for the Culture Center, for sponsoring this series, for the Chamber of Commerce who made our fireplace possible. It's and a number of people who donated the plants, and we thought this would just kind of be a really neat setting and a nice title to remember Cedarburg. And we'll invite you all now to share any memories or any things you want to share with either the panelists or with yourself, and if you have some suggestions, please make sure you let one of us know.
Dinner for $5.
$5? 25 cents, yeah. A duck dinner. Mary, the whole works. A whole duck. Yeah, that's great. Okay, thanks again, people. Thank you so much.